Ho, 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 Merry Christmas, everybody. It is the Christmas season, and it is Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. That means it's time for that EFIN morning after show with me. You know Adam Hulse is going to be here. We got tons of stats for you. We're going to talk about last week. We're going to set you up for the next week. Yes, we're going to talk about the Kansas City call because we got to, but we're going to have a lot of fun. We're glad you're here to join us. Let's get this thing started. Good morning, everybody. How you doing on this Tuesday morning? I don't know if anybody caught the games last night. I considered both kind of a surprise. It worked out 50-50 on our predictions. We'll get into that. We'll talk about this week that we just had. Adam, welcome back to the show. Stuff's getting crazy. NFL playoffs around the corner. The NFL is, the playoff picture is, I was going to say shaping up, but it's honestly as cloudy as ever. And we're going to talk all about it. Good morning, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, there's log jams in both conferences now, right? Like for those wild card races, like the division races aren't all that dramatic right now, right? Like it's not about the divisions, it's those wild card spots. And there's a giant group in both conferences fighting for those last couple of spots in the playoffs that it's going to be a fun final month of the season.
Insane. It's good. No, it's going to be really good. You're absolutely right. Part 5, I like to call it. And I'll explain that later in a little bit as we go. I kind of break the season down. And when we get into the stats, the first 4 weeks, 8, 12, 16, and then you got this last stretch. But it's really it's 4 parts because there's 16 weeks. We'll get into it. I'm not going to confuse everybody yet. Let's get into the record watch. Let's talk about how we did at the beginning of the year before it ever started. All right, as you guys know, before the season ever started, me and Adam, every team, every game, we broke it down. We already know who's going to the playoffs because we broke all this down for you. So, we play along, but we've actually got all this done already. Isn't that right, Adam? 100% accurate.
We're pretty close. I got to say, we're actually pretty close.
We actually kind of are. We'll
like you're not being too sarcastic when you say that. Like it's been pretty accurate.
The numbers are a little off, but the teams that are there at the end, pretty close. This week I went 7-8, so I had another losing record. You went 8-7. You pulled it off, the positive win, even though it was kind of split. The NFL in general had 9 home victories to 6 visiting victories, and that puts 115-92 for the home team this year. I'm sitting at 125-83, not bad. You are sitting at 130-78. Your lead just kind of adds another one every week, and you are 5 up on me now. The Carolina-New Orleans game is one that we split, and the thing that's hurting me is we agreed on so many games. There's only like 1 or 2 splits every week, and you seem to be getting them all. Not that I should really be surprised about that, but that's where that sits so far.
Well, there's usually a good amount of games on the schedule that are, I'm not going to say easy, but have like a team that should kind of win, right? Especially when you're looking at it before the season starts. Now, like if we were adding point spreads into this mix, this would have been a whole crazier thing. And I can promise you our records wouldn't be as good as they've been. But even with just picking the game straight up with where our record sits, it's been pretty unbelievable how good the records are. I have noticed, though, that over these last few weeks, we both kind of come back to earth a little bit, like those 11 and 12 win weeks that we were churning out seemingly every week for the first half of the season. There's been a lot more weeks around 500 lately.
And we're going to see that in the fantasy numbers as well. If we break down the stats this week, I break it down by position and show you guys the numbers. We're going to see how part 4 of this fantasy season, that's weeks 13 through 16, are much different in a fantasy perspective. And you just brought it up from the NFL perspective, but also from a fantasy perspective. We've got a lot of new faces on the list this week, on all the lists this week. And honestly, we have a lack of consistency across the board at every position. It's very interesting to look at. I hope you guys find it as interesting as I do. I'm kind of a numbers geek on these things, but I think you're going to like it, Adam. Let's get into a couple numbers right now. You see up there in the corner, this week we had 41 pass touchdowns to 27 rush touchdowns. Now, last week we had 29 rushing touchdowns, so not such a big deal, but we only had 23, I believe it was. 25. Last week we had 25 and 23. This week it's 41 pass touchdowns. That's quite the uptick, a 16 touchdown uptick compared to last week. And then there was also 6 more from the special teams and defense this week. That brings the total to 74 touchdowns that your fantasy folks could have banked in on this week. What do you think about that really ginormous shift, that very significant shift in the passing touchdowns, Adam?
Well, like I think, matchups are always going to have a lot to do with it, right? Like, which of like the good quarterbacks are in like higher scoring games and against defenses that can allow, some passing type of numbers. Matchups always important when you're looking at this kind of stuff. So like I'd say it's probably mostly a product of that.
Yeah, I can get down on that again. And I think we're going to see that when we talk about these numbers and people showing up in the top 10 that haven't really been there before. And then the people that have been there struggling in this last quarter of the season. And we'll see those numbers kind of show that as the show goes on. We're going to get into the rewind because that's going to get us into those stats. So let's talk a little bit about what we just saw over the weekend. Fantasy Rewind, we bring that to you. Toilets. I'll get this right. Toilets2titles.com. Go over there, check those guys out. They've got some amazing fantasy football content going on. You really want to get on the Discord. You want to get on the Gilded app and get on their Discord because it's just fantasy analysis and experts and breakdowns just all week long. They've got a lot of good stuff over there. Go check them out. Toilets2titles.com. All right, Adam. Last week, before we get into the actual numbers of the games, what were some of the things that you remember seeing? What sticks out in your head from last week?
Well, I mean, let's talk about the obvious one, right? The Dallas Cowboys finally show up this week in a big spot, in a big game with the whole world watching. I touched on it last week that I was confident in my Cowboys going into that game, but also acknowledged the fact that these are the spots where they usually let you down the most. In the biggest games, in the biggest moments against the best teams, the Cowboys usually crumble, and Dak usually plays his worst football. That's unstoppable right now. He's been absolutely unbelievable. I saw a stat that since week 6, he has 24 touchdowns and 2 interceptions since week 6.
It's ridiculous. His last 6 games, absolutely ridiculous. He's playing lights out. I understand why he's in the MVP conversation. I can make arguments for a lot of people, but he definitely has to be there. Good morning, David. David is regular to the show. He says, morning, fellas. Almost over this dang segment. He's feeling a little under the weather, but his fantasy seasons have been making him feel a bit better. I tell you what's keeping him down is the fact he's a Steelers fan like me, and so he's had to deal with losing to these teams that we should not have to lose to. David, feel free to chime in on what you saw this week that really got you excited or got you that you remember significant moments of this weekend, if you will. And you're right, Adam. Dallas, the thing that I was looking for with Dallas is that Dallas at home has scored 40 plus points in every game. And then in comes this Philadelphia defense, which really was tops of the tops in a lot of categories against the run. I said, don't play Pollard this week, which kind of was true. Pollard did not make the top 10, spoiler alert.
Well, they've been a polarizing defense, right? I think they were number 1 against running backs and dead last against quarterbacks or something like that.
Well, and the middle of the field, they brought it up during the pregame for that one. The middle of the field has been wide open for those guys. Dallas they didn't put up the 40, right? So that streak goes down, but they still get 33. They still win by 20, and you're right, they win in dominating fashion. It was the game.
And
Both
let's remember, too, that Jalen Hurts in that offense did not score a touchdown in that game. Their only touchdown was a defensive touchdown. So it was both sides of the ball for the Cowboys. Defense completely shut down their offense, and Dak absolutely picked apart their defense.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had to bring it up, David. I did. I'm a Steelers fan, too. You know it. At least you still got that team up north having a shot in your college prospects. Another game that caught my attention was the Baltimore win. That Baltimore win was really big for Baltimore, and the Rams were able to move the ball all day, and that was significant as well. The Rams caught my attention because that Baltimore defense, which is considered one of the best in the league, was not able to really do anything against the Rams, but the Rams defense wasn't able to do too much either. They get it to overtime, and Baltimore ekes out the win in that one. But Lamar's 316 yards was absolutely amazing. He is back in the top 10. We'll talk about where, but that game really caught my attention with how their defense was susceptible. And I had to say for the Tennessee-Miami game as well, Miami's Achilles heel clearly is their defense, and has kind of been that way all season.
Yeah, and the numbers say that Miami's defense is good, but when you watch them, they kind of get beat up a lot, and they're not great when teams go right at them. That power running game type of deal that the Titans do. That's been kind of an issue for the for the Dolphins all year long. I like what you said about the Rams-Ravens game, but to me, it's another reminder from a fantasy perspective. How good is Kyren Williams, man? Even against this elite Baltimore defense, he still did his thing. He still looked like he was playing any other defense. And the Ravens have shut, just about everybody down this year, but they couldn't even slow this kid down. He's the real deal.
When we break down in the next coming couple weeks, when we start breaking down the fantasy leaders and stuff, we're going to see a lot of the new guys up at the top, a lot of the first, second year guys up at the top this year. And he is definitely one of them. You're absolutely right. David learned never to bet against the Giants in an eliminator league. Every one I was in this year, I got knocked out choosing the team to beat the Giants. And we've been kind of touching on this all year. The Giants have sucked, and we knew that they were a fraud team. And then DeVito comes in, and is DeVito 3-0 right now?
He's won 3 in a row. I think he's 3-1. I think is what it is.
Yeah, 3 in a row.
But he's looked spectacular. I kind of had a feeling that the Giants were going to win that game last night. I just had one of those gut feelings that the Giants at home, Monday Night Football, the Packers have looked good lately. They've been kind of rolling. The Giants are kind of fighting their way back into a playoff spot, too. I saw a crazy thing about the Giants that before that game, if they won the game like they did, they're one game out of a playoff spot. If they had lost the game, they'd be one game out of a top 5 pick in the draft. How about that?
That's how it is in the NFC, though, right? 5 wins has you in the hunt in the NFC.
Yeah.
And technically 5 wins still has you in the hunt in the AFC as well. And we obviously.
The Giants are one game out, and they just got a head-to-head victory against the Packers, which are an important team in this wild card race as well.
It's huge, but you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams with 6 wins, and there's only 5 teams above those. So 5 is still in there with 4 games left to go. It's maths, everybody. It's a little early for you, but there it is. Any other games that kind of stuck out with you this weekend? Obviously, Pittsburgh losing to New England. That was kind of significant in, Pittsburgh.
Well, let's talk about the other big one then, too, and it's the Buffalo Bills getting the win against the Chiefs and keeping their playoff hopes alive as well. Them getting that victory gives them a much better chance of getting into the postseason. You can see it by their probabilities and their likelihoods and all, those stats that generate the probability of making it. That changes just about everything for the Bills. They have a really good shot now to get in the playoffs. Had they lost to the Chiefs, it would have been a big uphill battle because the Bills' tiebreaker situations are not so good right now. And it's just a reminder again, too, that though the Bills have kind of struggled this year, unlike what I said about the Cowboys, Josh Allen always shows up for the big games. Minus that Bengals playoff game last year, all the big games, look at Allen's numbers in big spots. He always shows up when he has to. So he's a guy I'm watching. Oh, yeah. And he's a guy I'm watching for this last month of the season. Put Josh Allen back against the wall and say, you got to go out there and win now or we're not making the playoffs. He showed he can do that against the Chiefs. In this little last stretch of the season, we might see Allen go crazy.
Yeah, and the Back It Up Bench podcast, welcome to the show. Absolutely 100% what I was going to bring up as well, that Finn's loss. Big Bills win keeps them in the hunt with that terrible Finn's loss. That the couple there definitely helps the Bills' chances. The Dolphins really
and the Bills already beat the Dolphins heads up. In their first meeting, the Bills beat the Dolphins, and they get to play them again in Week 18. So that's spot on accurate.
It's going to be interesting because Allen has caught so much crap for the past few weeks, and if this keeps up, you watch the media flip how fast they flip, and Allen will be the golden boy that he really has been all season. They were looking for a reason to come down on him, and he got one. They got one, but statistically, fantasy wise, and at the end of the season, we're going to see why he's on the cover of Madden. Again, keep those comments coming in. Let us know about the games, the things that caught your attention this weekend. Here's some things that caught my attention. You guys are going to love the stats this week all the way through. They're phenomenal. They're just mind-blowing stats this week. Here we go. All right, first stop, the QB room. Oh, let's get rid of that little logo. Can't have that in the way. Sorry, bud. There we go. All right, week 14, Evan facts about QBs. And this is all QBs in general. This isn't just the top 10 list, okay? But let's just get into it because it's a lot of fun, okay? Here we go. 34 quarterbacks played this week. Out of 32 teams, we had a couple substitutions, had a couple of injuries. Only 26 of them threw touchdowns. So that tells you the state of the quarterback position nowadays. 6 quarterbacks ran one in, and 5 of those 6. We're going to talk about versatility. Versatility is going to be a big thing between quarterbacks and running backs this week, as it has been all season, but you're going to see it in the stats. 5 threw 3 touchdowns. We talked about Zappy last night. 5 had 3. 4 of those made the top 10. Everything's not touchdown dependent, guys, in fantasy. We'll talk about similar thing with running backs as well. Number 1 in pass yards this week. Adam, who's number 1 in pass yards? Give me your best shot. Oh, Adam's getting coffee. Or I have him muted. One of the two. He's got himself muted. All right, Adam's getting coffee. I'll tell you who it is. It is none other than Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy comes in at number 1 in pass yards. Yep, you read that right. It is indeed Brock Purdy. He had a great game. Fantastic game this week. A big win against Seattle. Came through as he has been, did what he needed to do. He usually isn't the yardage leader, but there it is. He's coming into his own, There you go. Number 1 in rush yards, rushing yard QB. It's not who you think. Yes, it is. It's Lamar Jackson. Yeah. Lamar Jackson is the number 1 in rush yards this week. Number 1 for interceptions. You got a guess for number 1 in interceptions? With
number 1 in interceptions. I don't know.
Here's the interesting thing. He also threw 3 touchdowns. He had 3 touchdowns, but he also had 3 interceptions. He's the guy that didn't make the top 10 list. Is T-Law. T-Law did not have a great game.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, at the finish. Yep. I mean, he throws 3 touchdowns. You can't argue with that, and as a result, he doesn't make the top 10. And number 1 in sacks. Who's your number 1 sack guy this week? Which quarterback just got railed?
Well, it wasn't Zach Wilson, even though he's been getting sacked all year, and Sam Howell didn't play this week, so it couldn't be Sam Howell. So I don't know who it is then.
It is a
Those
guy
are usually your two. Those are usually your two. Oh, Bryce Young?
No. Oh, nice guess. It's actually Josh Dobbs, which is one of the reasons I benched him. You say you got benched because of his
What an
performance.
ugly game that was. Jesus.
Yeah, it was. But you got to think at some point, kid's getting hit 5 times. He's the only quarterback we got left. Let's pull him out. Let's pull him and make sure we don't end up in a Burrow situation. Number 1 in pass percentage, 75%. This will blow your mind. And I know percentages can be skewed. They can. But this is going to blow your mind. Number 1 in pass percentage. There's 2 guys. You're going to love it. Jake Browning and Zach Wilson. Those are your top 2 pass percentage guys for this week. Love it.
Zach Wilson balled out this week. Best game of his career.
We probably should have brought that up. That should have been a notable moment in our heads. 6 quarterbacks had plus 300 yards, but only 4 of those made the top 10. It's these things that you think, getting 300 yards, that should be an automatic top 10 guy. Getting 3 touchdowns, that should be an automatic top 10 guy. It's not. You got to be versatile. You got to get the rushes in. Now we're getting into the top 10 list. You needed 21.3 points to make the top 10. That was 1.6 better than the average. You need a little bit more this week. 7 of your top 10 quarterbacks won, 3 of them lost. We've been talking for weeks about how losing actually helps you make the top 10 list in fantasy. 5 of the 10 had a rushing touchdown. We talked about that. 8 out of the 10 had 2 or more sacks. So even though you get sacked, as long as you don't get out of control with it. Only 3 were here last week. These are the kind of things that are going to blow your mind throughout this. 3 of these quarterbacks, 3 of the top 10 quarterbacks were here last week. And all 10 had 2 or more TDs and had 1 or less interceptions. So you talk about you got to be consistent. You got to get the job done. These guys did it. 5 ran it. All of them had 2 or more touchdowns, and they all have 1 or less interception. That's what it takes to get on the top 10 list. So who made the top 10 list? Let's get after it. Oh, yeah, 3 new additions to the top 10 list. 39 quarterbacks have made the top 10 list this year. Let's get into it. Number 10. I love this list with 3 new people on it. Joe Flacco comes in at number 10. Back. Falco is back. He's at number 10. Look good doing it, too. Josh Allen at number 9. Sliding a little bit, but still had a good game. Mitch Trubisky comes in at number 8. Despite how bad they played, Mitch Trubisky is on the list. And saying Billy Zappe is on the list against my Pittsburgh Steelers. So both those teams, in effort to see who sucked less, make the top 10 list. Brock Purdy, we talk about your yards leader, but he's only at number 6. Even though you lead in yards, you think that puts you. No, it does not. Matt Stafford at number 5. Jake Browning comes in at number 4. How lucky are the Cincinnati Bengals to have this guy showing up? Justin Fields at number 3. Gotta love those rush yards. Desmond Ridder at number 2 against Tampa. Tampa's defense is not, I'm not calling them like the best on the field or anything, but they haven't been horrible. Desmond Ridder, and we know why. We'll talk about that later on as well. We understand the quarterback-wide receiver relationship with these top 10 lists, so you can piece that together. And Adam, who is the number 1 quarterback in fantasy this week? There's a
Lamar Jackson.
It is indeed Lamar Jackson. There he is. He finishes at number 1. Look, ran him in, had 2 or more, 1 or less interception, top in yards, not number 1, but up towards the top in yards, complete game. That's what it takes to get on the list in fantasy. We're going to see it's not that way for all the positions, but for this case, it absolutely is. Adam, what do you think about what we just saw with these quarterback stats? And what do you guys out there think with these quarterback stats?
I mean, I was loving it from Lamar and Fields this week. I have shares of them in a good amount of leagues. They definitely helped me out this week. Desmond Ridder, definitely an interesting one. And he's a guy that he's been very polarizing this year. He has a couple of top 10s, like a lot talked about how bad Desmond Ridder has been. And this is one of those things, like from an NFL perspective, Desmond Ridder has been very bad and is very bad. But from a fantasy football perspective, in Superflex leagues, in the right matchups, he's been not just serviceable, but pretty good.
And I don't know, like, do you have him in fantasy matchups, though? I don't know if you put him in fantasy matchups. I don't know how you put the guy in. I mean, to be fair, he hasn't had a lot of appearances. I think this is his second appearance on the top 10 list all season. So it's not like something you're going to necessarily predict. It's not like teams are blowing up Tampa Bay or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely a tricky one to figure out. He obviously got benched in the middle of the season as well. I mean, I think he's been a little bit better, since coming back. Not even really coming back by choice. He came back because of an injury, right? So just interesting, kind of to watch, and it's the rushing upside that we always talk about, right?
Absolutely.
Like he can run the ball, he grabs some rushing touchdowns here and there, and when he's getting the rushing yards, these mobile quarterbacks like that, especially in Arthur Smith's system, like he can have some pop weeks.
The other thing that just astounded me, only 3 were here last week. We're going to get into that when we get in a little later in the show. But only 3 were here last week. You talk about the inconsistency in this part 4 of the season. A lot of new faces, and they pop up every week. You can stream. We talk about drafting the 0 RB strategy. It's it's almost getting there for the quarterbacks as well. Just take wide receivers and then go from there. The numbers are just you won't believe them as we go through this show, and I queue up the next round at running back. So let's go ahead and hit the running back position. All right, here we go. Running back facts. This is facts for all running backs this week. Again, a lot of brain teasers, brain blasters here. Only 3 running backs went plus 100, and only one of those made the top 10. If you on the Instagram, if you're on the X machine and all that, you'll see I did a piece on this last week. Last week, Joe Mixon was number 1, only had 68 rushing yards. You do not have to get 100 yards. You do not have to lead in yards for your running back to be relevant in fantasy anymore. And this is kind of what feeds into this 0 RB strategy, I think, when it comes to the draft. 15 running backs had rushing touchdowns. Only 3 had multiple touchdowns. Nobody had multiple rushing touchdowns. All right. Until last night. Last night we had 2 with multiple running touchdowns. 2 of the multiple touchdown running backs made the top 10. All right. So we're going to see how that all plays out in just a second. It's going to become clear. I know it's a little foggy right now, but it will become clear when we get into the list. 5 running backs caught a touchdown, and all 5 made the list. This is the things that we've been talking about for a couple of weeks. This is how the running back position is more than just running. And honestly, it is the receiving backs, just like the quarterbacks who can run them in, the running backs who can catch them and take them in are the ones that are setting up your fantasy wins this year. 5 running backs had 70 plus receiving yards, and 4 of those made the top 10. Again, showing how you need that all-around back to be successful in fantasy. Let's talk about it. Number 1 in rush yards, CMC. I can tell you right now, did not make the list for like the second or third time all year. Did not make the list, but he's your number 1 rusher. Why? No touchdowns. You got to have put together a complete game, but he was number 1, 145 in the rush room. Receiving yards, Tajay Spears comes in at your receiving yards. Not who you would think it would be CMC or something like that. No, it's Tajay Spears. Also did not make the top 10. Didn't have the fully balanced game. Next, number 1 in attempts. That volume, RB7 made it, and then Kyron Williams. Both of them had 25 carries with the ball this week. And number 1 in those receptions ended up at RB2 because he had the complete game. RB2, number 1 in receptions. Let's talk about what it took to get on that top 10 list this week. You needed 19.5. Again, you needed a little bit more this week than in previous weeks. 5 out of the 10 did not have a rushing touchdown. We are talking about the running back room, ladies and gentlemen. 5 of your top 10 did not even have a rushing TD. We talk about diversity. We talk about receiving backs. Look, the evidence just keeps piling up, including your top 3. No rushing touchdowns for your top 3, 5 altogether. 5 out of the 10 had receiving touchdowns. We talk about that. 8 out of the 10 won. A little more lopsided here. 8 out of the 10 came out with a victory. Only 2 had more than 1 touchdown. Only 2 of your top 10 running backs had more than 1 touchdown. Only 1 of your top 10 went over 100. We talked about that. Cincinnati had 2 make the list. That's how that game went. 46 running backs have now made the top 10 list because we added 2 more this week. Whoa. And only 2 were here last week. Only 3 quarterbacks made from last week made it again. To be fair, Allen was on the bye week. Only last week. Last week he was on the bye week, so he couldn't string these together. Only 2 running backs on this week's top 10 list were here last week. We got 8 new entrants compared to last week. Not rookie entries, but here we go with your running back top 10. Are you ready, Adam? Here we go. Number 10, Chase Brown. Chase Brown makes it. We talk about how important receptions are. Kid only had 3. Good enough to make the top 10. Nobody saw this coming. Nobody did.
From out of nowhere.
Nobody played him in DFS. Nobody played him. He got 0 plays. I'm telling you, don't lie to me and tell me, unless you're like in a 32-man league or something. Bijan Robinson comes in at number 9. Austin Eckler, welcome back at number 8. Rachaad White, he's your 100-yard rusher that made the top 10 list this week. Joe Mixon, he's back, falls from number 1 to 6. He's up back on the top 10. I told you only 2 guys did it. He's one of them. Raheem Mostert, welcome back to the list. Although, honestly, 2 touchdowns is good. I expected more out of his position this week. Saquon Barkley falls in the end zone a couple times, falls into the 4 spot. James Cook, welcome back to the list. I mean, the guy hasn't been here forever. He finally gets on the list in a game that maybe you wouldn't have expected him to be on the list. But Kansas City's softer on the run than they are against the pass. Number 2, Breece Hall. He was your number 1 in receptions, ends up number 2 on the list. Any ideas at number 1 there, Adam?
Number 1 I was going to say it was Rashad, but he's lower than I thought.
Come on,
no.
Bijan. There's some clues on the board. There's some clues on the board.
It is. It's escaping me right now.
It's your boy.
Oh, Zeke. My goodness.
Zeke.
How'd I forget?
In the top 10,
how did I forget?
Number 1, huge game against a team you're not supposed to be able to run on, against a team that's supposed to shut it down. Zeke Elliott at number 1 on your list this week. It's got to make you feel good. It makes me feel good as a Buckeye. I know it makes you feel good as a Cowboy. There's still love for Zeke. He gets his shot with the Ramonde injury, and he comes through number 1 debut on the top 10 list. Zeke Elliott. There you go.
I absolutely love that Zeke balled out this week, and it wasn't coming to me because, like, when I'm going through everything, like, my brain just keeps going to Sunday. I'm like, who am I missing? It was Zeke from Thursday.
You're not going to think of Zeke. Like, nobody's going to think of Zeke to be there. I agree. I love that he's there. I love that he got a chance to ball out. I don't know if he'll be there next week. Not one of these guys is typically consistent week to week, but there it is. You go from 1, you got a good chance to at least, like Mixon did, even if you fall, you got 10 spots to make it. But that is your top 10 list in running back. Besides Zeke, and you can still comment on Zeke, of course, what sticks out on this list for you?
Well, like you were talking about touchdowns and versatility and stuff like that. And, like what I'm seeing here is that if you don't have that receiving upside and you're not getting a good amount of catches as a running back, this list shows again that if you want to be up there, you have to score touchdowns, and probably not just 1. You probably got to score 2, like your Derrick Henry type of situation, right? Like if you're not scoring multiple touchdowns and you're not catching passes, you're not going to get into the top 10. And on the flip side, even if you don't score that touchdown, if you do catch a lot of passes, a guy like Rachaad White, who's having a great second half of this season, mostly as a receiver, he's done it a couple times as a rusher as well, but you got to target those receiving backs on your draft day because they have so much upside when they're catching the ball that they don't need that touchdown to have a big week.
Your top 10 on the season, 8 of them have receiving touchdowns. Most of those 8 have multiple receiving touchdowns. Right now, Derrick Henry does not have a receiving touchdown. Tony Pollard does not have a receiving touchdown on the year. Kind of interesting. I would have thought Pollard would have had one. Not necessarily surprised about Henry, but yeah, there you go for the season. So that is your top 10 RB list. Those are the stats. That's how it breaks down. There's really only one place to go next. Let's do it. Here we go. Wide receivers. This is for the entire week 14. Some facts about wide receivers. Again, some of these are head scratchers. 6 wide receivers went over 100, but only 4 made the top 10. I don't want to ruin it yet. We'll talk about that in a second. 20 caught touchdowns. 20 wide receivers total this week caught touchdowns, and 2 ran one. Both the wide receivers that did something you're not normally supposed to do in the position, they both made the top 10 list. It happened with the quarterbacks. It happened with the running backs. It happens again with the wide receivers. There's only 2 rushing touchdowns from wide receivers. Both of them made the list this week. I can't make this stuff up, guys. 21 wide receivers had double-digit targets. 21. All right? Only 20 wide receivers even caught touchdowns. 21 had double-digit targets. Only one guy was able to haul in double-digit receptions. That's a horrible stat. That's a horrible stat if you're a wide receiver. 21 of you got the ball thrown to you more than 10 times, 10 or more times, and only one of you was good enough to haul in double digits. We'll see who that is when we hit the top 10 list, as you can imagine. Number 1 in receiving yards this week ended up at wide receiver 2. Number 1 in rush yards this week ended up at wide receiver 6. Number 1 for receptions this week ended up at wide receiver 2. Wide receiver 2 had a big day. He had a big day. I'm surprised he wasn't number 1, but he wasn't. And the receivers with the 2 total touchdowns, no wide receiver had more than 1 receiving touchdown. 2 wide receivers, those guys that ran one in, are the only ones that had 2. They finished up at 1 and 2. Versatility at your position is what the key to victory is in fantasy. The numbers don't lie. I can't make this stuff up. Let's talk about the top 10 wide receiver list this week. Adam, you needed 19.5 this week. You needed a little less. You needed a little less this week than you normally have to make the top 10 list. Only 2 of the wide receivers were here this week. Only 2 running backs repeated on the top 10 list. Only 3 quarterbacks and only 2 wide receivers repeated on the list. It's insane. 6 out of 10 are here for only the second time. It's been a long time since a lot of these guys have been here. Okay. Plus you got the newbies. All right. 8 out of the 10 won again. 6 went for 100 yards. 5 of those guys made the list. So yards do matter a little bit more. Baltimore has 2 guys on the list. That'll give you some clues to who's here. Second week that Green Bay debuts a wide receiver. Watson's first time on the list last week. We got someone else first time from Green Bay on the list this week. 57 wide receivers now made the top 10 list this season. 3 newbies this week. We got 3 rookies to the list this week. That's a lot of rookies on the top 10 list. Let's get into the top 10 list. Number 10. Michael Pittman Jr. We talked about him playing him. I did do the Minshew Pittman stack, and in my DFS, Michael Pittman number 10. Odell Beckham Jr. He's one of your newbies to the list. He shows up. It's part 4. We're getting into the playoff hunt. We are getting into the must-win games. OBJ shows up and does exactly what he's supposed to do, why he is there. Ends up at number 9. Zay Flowers is your second Baltimore receiver. Is that against the defense? Is it on the offense? Was Baltimore just clicking? Probably a combination of both. Zay Flowers ends up on the list for like the second time, I think. Garrett Wilson. This is amazing. This is his first time on the list all season. He has not made the top 10 in fantasy all season until now. Here he is at number 7. Jaden Reed, there's your Green Bay debut. DeAndre Hopkins is back on the list. Cooper Kupp makes a visit at number 4. Told you, Baltimore defense could not stop them. DJ Moore, he had a lot of rushing yards, and that deep, wide open pass for a touchdown towards the third quarter, I think it was. Drake London, that's your number 2. That's your rush yards leader. That's your reception leader. That's the only guy that can pull in his double-digit targets. The only guy out of 21 receivers that got double-digit targets. Drake London is the only one that can pull double-digit receptions in. He ends up at your number 2. Kind of surprising he was number 2 with those kind of numbers. But number 1, what do you got, Adam? Debo. Clues all over the board. You got the Niners field. Debo, he gets 2 into the end zone. He got some rushing. Catches 1, rushes 1. Again, versatility at the position gets you wins in fantasy. Adam, how you feeling about this list, my friend?
I mean, Debo has been unstoppable lately. He's on a ridiculous tear in fantasy football right now with the numbers he's putting up. Drake London, he's kind of been up and down all year, right? Like very slow start
played
to
him
the
in my
season.
roster. I knew.
Yeah, then he started doing great for like a little stretch, and I was getting him back into lineups. Then he completely disappeared again, and then this week he explodes for WR2. Cooper Kupp
over 170 yards for Drake London. Over 170 yards.
Yeah. Unbelievable game for London. Cooper Kupp finally bouncing back. It wasn't really being talked about much, I feel like, but he has been completely nothing since his first, 1 or 2 games since returning from the injury. He's basically done nothing since then. Like, he has not been Cooper Kupp only a couple times. So people who have Kupp were definitely happy to see him finally have a big game this week.
I agree.
And then, you said it with Garrett Wilson. Like, that's an interesting one that he just made the top 10 for the first time. I mean, obviously, poor quarterback play is extremely difficult to overcome for a wide receiver. Michael Pittman has been one of the most consistent fantasy football wide receivers of any wide receiver this entire season. Michael Pittman gets double-digit targets every single week, and he's doing a lot with them. Minshew loves Pittman. Minshew loves Pittman. He goes his way all the time. He goes his way in big spots on third downs, in the red zone, all situations. He's looking for Pittman. Pittman's been an absolute stud this year.
The thing about Pittman, too, is he doesn't he's only got 4 visits to the top 10 list this year. They're both 9 and 10 visits. But when you talk about all of the wide receiver position, you figure in a 10-person league, you've probably got about 30 wide receivers going. Bump that to 36 for a 12, because most of them play 3. Even if you're only playing 2, that's 24 to 36 wide receivers. So you've got a little more versatility there. What I kind of look for is above 15 points. As long as my receiver gets above 15 points with that kind of diversity, I count that as a good day. Because at the wide receiver position, honestly, 15 points or above, you've got around 20 people. The average right now is around 22. 22 wide receivers every week get above 15 points. So as I just said, you're talking 24 to 36. Above 15 points, that's a good day for your wide receivers. And he's gotten above 15 points 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games. Pittman has gotten you above 15 points. So he's been consistently valuable as a fantasy asset, regardless of the top 10 list. The top 10 lists are fun to play with, but I need consistency with value. And Pittman, as you said, has been one of those guys that even though he doesn't make the top 10 list, he's always getting that 15 and above. That's what I need. I need those points. And he's getting them for you if you have been playing them. This currently sits at fantasy wide receiver number 11. And again, now that we're getting into playoff season and you're talking 12 to 18 wide receivers playing every week, number 11, that's one of the guys you want to have. Pittman Jr., there he is. Again, some interesting stats, I think, facts, if you will, from the wide receiver, just across the board. I think there's a lot of interesting things that we can work with and talk about the positions, and we're going to in this next segment called the Fantasy Pulse with Adam Hulse. It's the Hulse Check with Adam Hulse. We do this every week. It's one of my favorite parts of the show. I bring it to Adam, and he gives it back. He has no idea what I'm about to send his way. Either do you guys. Feel free to comment on what we are about to talk about. Adam, we've kind of touched on it a little bit throughout the show. Well, a lot of it, honestly. The new faces. We have 3 new quarterbacks. We had 2 new running backs. We had 3 new wide receivers. That's 8 of the 30 people making the top 10 list. 8 of them were brand new to the list. QBs make sense because you got injuries, you got guys stepping up. Elliott, I think, is a benefactor of that. But why in this part 4 of the season, okay, that's weeks 13 through 16, the first part 1, part 2, part 1, people are feeling out. Part 2, part 3, you saw a little more consistency. Now we're in part 4, and we see guys coming out of the woodwork, guys that haven't been doing it necessarily all season, or at least not consistently, and now here they are on the list. Why are we seeing that? What's the fantasy relevance here?
Well, I mean, injuries definitely have a lot to do with it, and you touched on it. But, there's the trickle-down effect with some of the injuries as well, right? Like when you see a backup quarterback come in, it's going to change the target hierarchy of the wide receivers because they prefer different route combinations. They have chemistry with different guys than what the starter had. So it kind of changes the entire offensive package when you have to make a change at quarterback, or even if you have like a heavily featured running back or wide receiver that you kind of design your offense around. Everything looks different if they go out. I mean, think about the Vikings. When Justin Jefferson's in the lineup, he gets, 15 plus targets a game and everything runs through Justin Jefferson. He hadn't been there in a while, and the way they were calling plays and designing the whole offense looks completely different. You saw Alexander Madison get a bump while Justin Jefferson was out because he's getting more touches and more involvement. So injuries and the trickle-down effect definitely is a big thing. The other thing I will say is a concept that I touched on. I think it was either last week or the week before, that these offenses with all these crazy wild card races and so many teams alive, for veteran players and for guys that you're managing their workloads and limiting their touches throughout the year, this final phase that you've referenced several times during this show is the phase where you take all those training wheels off, you take all the restrictions off. Load management is no longer a thing anymore this time of the season. You were keeping your guys fresh for this moment that if you're in a playoff race or in the playoffs, either way, at the end of the year, that your best players and your veterans and your studs are all fresh and healthy and ready to play their best football right now. To me, one of the names that jumps out because he made the top 10 and he's a perfect example of this is Odell Beckham Jr.
Yes, absolutely.
He was injured at the beginning of the year, and even though he was playing very limited, they were using him sparingly, not a whole lot. And now it's towards the end of the season. It was a game against his former team in the Rams that the Ravens said, all right, Odell, we're going to let you loose now and hope you stay healthy, for this run. But we've maintained you and managed you and made sure you were good to go for the end of the year because that's when we need you the most. And he responded.
I've said it. I preach it all the time. When you get a new quarterback in, hit the wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. Those are the guys that these backup quarterbacks get reps with. They don't get reps with wide receiver 1s, and they get a few of them with the wide receiver 2. Those wide receiver 2, especially that wide receiver 3 guy, when a new quarterback comes in, especially for fantasy purposes, go back and look. I'll run some stats for you if you want. It's 100% across the board. The new guy comes in, those 2 3s, they become the number 1s for the first couple weeks as the timing gets developed between the wide receiver 1 and the backup over a couple weeks. And you brought up, we talked about it last week about the running back position, how we see this uptick in running back production at the end of the year because it's the healthy ones. It's the ones that kind of been saved. We see guys like Bijan Robinson get back on the list. We see guys that weren't here, that haven't put together a lot of top 10 games. You see Tajay Spears end up as the number 1 in receptions, even though he didn't make the list. James Cook back on the list. It's that saving them up for when I really need you. When I really need you, this is when I need you to show up. And I agree with you with this one that has a big thing to play in it.
Yeah, Bijan's a great example too. He was basically evenly splitting touches and even getting out-touched by Tyler Algier for most of the year. These last few games, it has not been like that at all. Tyler Algier has completely fallen off the map, and it is all Bijan Robinson in that backfield lately. So you're going to see a lot of teams do that. Flip that switch now that we're not managing your load anymore. We need you to go right now.
Stafford put together 3 in a row. All right. Howell has done it, and he had more than 3 in a row. Hurts has done it, and Allen has done it. Those are the 4 quarterbacks for the entire season that have been able to put 3 top 10 performances in a row. All right. No one else has been able to do it 3 in a row. For the running back room, you've got Eckler, you've got ETN, you've got Kamara, and Achane did it at the beginning of the season. Other than CMC, those are the only 4 guys that have been able to put together 3 in a row. No one else has been able to do it, all right, to put a top 10 performance. And at receivers, Hill's been doing it all year. Jefferson did it. JJ did it at the beginning of the year before he got hurt. Diggs did it at the beginning of the year. Lamb did it in part 2 of the year, part 2, part 3. AJ did it. Debo has now done it. They are the only, and then this week we talked about the lack of repeats. All right. Nobody's repeating. Nobody's putting 2 weeks in a row. We only had 3 return quarterbacks, 3 return wide receivers, 2 return running backs, whatever it was. They're not stringing them together. We're seeing guys step up. We're seeing, like you said, that diversity. What's with the lack of consistency, especially towards the end of the season, but really the entire fantasy season at every position? There's only a couple of guys that can put together 2-3 weeks in a row for these top 10, these high performances.
Well, to me, it speaks to that the level of competition in the NFL has gotten so much better in these last couple of years, in my opinion. And we're even seeing it, right, with the landscape of the playoff races this year. Like, a lot of teams now are unable to, like, separate themselves from the pack, right? There's a lot of teams kind of on equal playing fields, and that's because the players are just getting so good also. All these rosters are good. All these teams, there's a lot of teams with good quarterbacks that are on the same plane, or running backs on the same plane, or receiving cores on the same plane, right? And because the talent level of these teams is really starting to level out, and you're really seeing that competition level being so good across the board, there's only like a couple teams right now that are like out of the playoff race. Only a couple, right?
True.
And
we'll get into that.
Even look at like the landscape of the AFC conference right now, like where's the juggernaut team? Where's the teams that are like truly separating themselves from the pack? Sure, the Ravens have been great all year, okay, but the Dolphins just lost to the Titans. The Chiefs have lost a couple of games in a row. The Jaguars have lost a couple of games now. Like, these teams are all very even, and though there's division races and wild card race, they're kind of all like pretty close, and I think because of how close these teams are competition wise, it's because of those rosters, and we're seeing that in fantasy as well. Like, all the good guys aren't just on a handful of teams and they're dominating every single week. All these teams have guys who can make noise. It's showing up in the standings, and it's showing up in the fantasy numbers.
It makes it a little more difficult when you're putting together your playoff rosters, but there are guys that have been consistent. I just named them: Hill, JJ, Diggs, Lamb, AJ, Debo. There's guys, and we'll get more into that, probably next week. I'll probably do that. Go subscribe to the Instagram at that EFIN show. You'll see information on that all week. Last question, Adam, the Kansas City penalty. All right. It takes back a touchdown that would have given Kansas City the game. The first gripe was that Kansas City, should have got a warning. They've always gotten warnings before. They never, they almost never call offensive offsides. Tony should have checked with the ref. And you hear a lot of talk about how Kansas City's now dealing with what everybody else has to deal with. Kansas City usually gets away with it, whereas the other teams get called for it. And you hear all this complaining about Kansas City whining, honestly, how it came out. Why is Kansas City whining? Then we find out, the video comes out, that Tony did check with the ref. Now, you could argue that Tony wasn't completely set when he checked with the ref, and it was pretty good. I don't know how he even got a response back, but Tony did check with the ref. And so the numbers come out that last year, 2 offensive offsides were called. The year before that, 1 offensive offside was called. This year, 11 have been called. So there's an uptick. There's more attention being paid to it. I don't know if 11 is significant in over 200 games played, but 2 versus last year, 1s and 2s versus 11, I can kind of see it. The question is, there's been a lot of talk about officiating kind of for the past 2 seasons, a huge uptick in it this year. They should have to answer further actions at the end of the game, do press conferences. There's a lot of games that have been decided by ref calls. The ref topic seems to be consistent every week, and it's gaining speed. What do you think about that? What are they going to do about it, if anything? Talk to me about the problems with refs. Is there one?
Well, look, I mean, here is a big problems with the refs and with their accountability, and a big reason why they don't have to answer for anything, and that's because the NFL has consistently chosen not to hire them as full-time employees. The referees, let's remember, they are a unionized group of referees that are basically on contract with the NFL, not full-time employees. So you have to remember that that's kind of a two-way street, right? So the refs kind of like make some of their own rules in a sense with stuff like you said, with media availability and stuff like that. The NFL can't make them do it because that's not their employees. Coaches, players, stuff like that have media obligations as being an employee of the NFL. Technically, the refs are not employees of the NFL. So, that stuff's on the referee union, not on the NFL. So if you have a gripe with that, maybe it should be that, can we finally get the NFL to put the refs on full-time contracts? Because then they could have a little bit more say over some of this stuff that goes on and hold them accountable and stuff like that.
I don't think they want that either, though. I don't think the refs would agree to that. That's what, the union's there for.
Look, money talks. Money talks. Right?
Sure.
I actually saw it the other day that referees make on average about $200K per year. That's like an NFL referee.
And most of them are Fortune 500 company employees already.
Sure. Right.
These are guys who know people.
If you're the NFL and you're saying that full-time reps are going to get a bump to $500,000 a year, that's more than doubling their yearly salary. You don't think they'd be interested in talking about something like that?
Yeah, maybe.
Or what about $1 million per year? I mean, the NFL only makes like $100 billion a season, right? You could pay your reps $1 million a season, and everybody's happy, right?
Is there a problem? Let's go back. Yeah, go ahead.
Is what a problem?
No, go ahead. Go with your.
Okay, but yeah, going back, I was going to say to the actual game, the actual call itself. First of all, I'm going to give credit to Peter King. He wrote about it in the Football Morning in America column that since 2019, every year before the season, how the referees and the NFL sends out points of emphasis to every team and things that they're going to be looking for this year more so than they haven't in years past. Offensive offsides has been one of them for the past few seasons. He said between 2016 and 2019, there were 0 total offensive offsides called in any game during that stretch, right? And then you laid out the numbers over the last few seasons of what it's been. So it's not like the NFL didn't warn teams that this is going to be something that they're looking for more so now than they ever have. You mentioned the Tony video. Let's be honest, Tony didn't really check, right? He got up to the line, he pointed at the ref and basically said, "I'm good." He just pointed at him and then looked back at Mahomes. He didn't wait for the referee's response. Usually the ref will give you a point or a nod, or he'll wave his hand back if you have to move back a little bit. All Tony did was quickly just point at the referee to say, "Yep, I'm good."
And he was clearly offsides. It wasn't even close.
And let's be honest here. He was offsides. 100%. This is not a controversial call.
No.
He was offsides. Now, if you want to debate whether it should be called in that moment or not, that's a fair debate. You don't want the refs changing the outcome of the game. But this is the Chiefs we're talking about. How many times have major calls and big moments helped them win games? Because you're talking about that video that came out with Tony on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it right now. There are a whole bunch of videos circling right now of Patrick Mahomes getting calls late in game and celebrating those referee calls. And now he's being a hypocrite after the game, saying that calls should never decide a game, this and that. He's asking for penalties on last drives of games all the time, and as he should. I'm not saying he shouldn't do that. But if you're going to do that and want the penalties when you have, like, you know, when they work in your favor, but you can't throw penalties when it works against us, that is him being whiny. It's him being a baby. He's not used to that. He's used to it going his way. He's also not used to being on a losing streak, and he's not used to the Chiefs being relatively, I'm not going to say mediocre, but they are not better than all the other teams in the AFC like they are every season. I think he's getting frustrated. He's been on the top for a very long time. He's having a pedestrian season for his own unbelievable standards. He's usually always, you know, right in the mix for the MVP. He's nowhere near it this year. The Chiefs are not as dominant. And I think all of that just kind of came out. All of his frustrations about the season in general, he's pointing it at one call, which it's not about just that call. It's not just about that call. It's everything for Patrick Mahomes piling up right now, and that was the breaking point.
And, you know, I'll give a little credit to that. You know, I do think it was a lot of the frustration, because you can't just say that the rules only matter up until the last drive. You know, you can't just, the rules are the rules, and if you're offside, you're offside. And he was clearly offside. Like, it wasn't close. When you look at the comparison of where the receiver is who's onsides to where Tony was offsides, it's not inches. I mean, it was
like a full yard, maybe more. Yeah,
it was a lot. And so just because it's the last drive, you don't say, oh, well, the rules don't count right now because it's the last drive, and the rules got to count. That's what rules are for. Rules are rules all the time. You know, you can't say, you know, Brady can deflate the ball, you know, in the last 1 minute. You can't say it's okay to steal calls for the last 1 minute of the game. You can't do that. And so I do think a lot of it's frustration, but I think that is where the frustration comes from the fans, because we're not used to that from Mahomes. And you're right. That's something that he needs to get used to. But even Reed and the rest of the organization, and these guys are longtime professionals, and they've had to deal with adversity. And you expect a little more maturity and able to handle the adversity. And we've seen him do it. We've seen everybody do it, because that's part of the game. You get the token quotes and all that stuff. You know, everybody gave 100%. We just went out there and played as a team, and all that. And that's what you got to do sometimes. Sometimes you just got to be like, you know, that's how it goes. I don't know. I haven't seen the tape yet. I don't know if he was actually offsides. Obviously, we're frustrated in this moment, but it doesn't change anything at the end. There's just a whole lot of different ways you can handle that situation. And I think that's what we expect from Mahomes. That's what he's done before. He's been all class, and it's just finally you get a moment where the frustration got the better of him. And that's not to come down to Mahomes. That's to say he's human like everybody else. I think Mahomes shouldn't have done it. Mahomes is in the wrong. Mahomes should admit to being in the wrong. But at the same time, you would be frustrated in that moment as well. So I'm not so mad about it.
There's one more quick thing, you know, kind of on that too. It's like, we know Mahomes is an emotional guy. It's just that we've always seen him be super successful, and his emotion comes out in the celebrations and the getting pumped up and the screaming on the sideline, because it's always been in success. He's not one of those level-headed, stone-faced quarterbacks. He's like Tom Brady in that sense, that when good things happen, he gets fired up and he starts yelling and he's getting the crowd pumped up and stuff like that. We've never seen a whole bunch of adversity with Mahomes. This is adversity, and it's just saying that, look, like, he is an emotional guy. It's just that now we're seeing it from the other ends as well. And the last point that I want to make, like, Andy Reid, okay? He never, ever, ever comments or complains or does anything like this. So I want to give props to Andy Reid, because in my opinion, the only reason he's making a big stink about it right now is because of how upset his quarterback, Mahomes, was, and the way that Mahomes reacted Andy Reid's just backing his guy.
Yeah.
You know, this is not typical. And typical Andy Reid would be like, look, like the call is the call. If we play better for the rest of the game, that call wouldn't have mattered so much.
Yeah.
Like the officials didn't lose the game for us. We could have played better. You know, it's our fault for leaving it in the hands of the officials. That'd be an Andy Reid type response. But he's like, look, Mahomes is getting all this heat for his reactions and how he handled it. Let me take some of it off him. I'll jump in there too. I'll back my guy. So props to Andy Reid for that. And also props to Mahomes because I believe he has apologized to Josh Allen and kind of said, like, you know, Josh had nothing to do with it and I kind of shouldn't have taken it out on Josh Allen in that little exchange. I was just upset.
Yeah. This has been the Hulse check with Adam Hulse. Just nothing more to say after that. I mean, NFL writer Adam Hulse, he sums it up perfectly. Thanks for doing that, Adam. He does it every week. And every week over on Fantasy Sports Corporation Network, we got a Thanksgiving one. I got to update it. I'm sorry. But the Waiver Wire show is every Tuesday at p.m. You got to go check that out to find out who you need to grab off the waiver wire to win your playoff matchups. Waiver Wire show from TSS Fantasy on the Fantasy Sports Corporation channel. Let's get into this week. Let's talk about who you need to pick up to win those matchups. Segue here. We got some good games this week. We got some opportunities this week. We got a lot of teams that are playing for consolation brackets. But we got a lot of teams trying to win a playoff matchup. And it starts on Thursday with the Chargers, who cannot seem to win a game despite all the fantasy numbers and matchups and talent, versus Las Vegas. I know Chargers versus Las Vegas doesn't seem very fun to watch, but honestly, this could give some fantasy value, in my opinion, Adam.
Well, I mean, the Chargers secondary has gotten torched all season long. So even though it's Aiden O'Connell, I think in your fantasy matchups, you can definitely feel comfortable with Devontae Adams. And I think you can with Jacoby Myers as well, because every receiver seems to put up numbers against the Chargers this year.
Yeah.
The biggest thing I'm looking at, well, there's kind of two. For one, it's a bummer for Keenan Allen owners, right? That Easton Stick is going to start this game for their playoffs. That would make me nervous. It does make me nervous in the leagues that I have Keenan Allen because we know who he is with Justin Herbert. And I'm not saying Keenan Allen can't produce with Easton Stick. I'm sure he'll get his usual volume of targets. But how productive is their offense really going to be with Easton Stick, who looked like a disaster last week when he did come in, and against the Raiders defense that has played really good lately. Since Antonio Pierce has taken over, minus maybe the Chiefs game, the Raiders have played pretty well. So that's a concerning thing. And Josh Jacobs didn't practice first day of the week. He's dealing with, first they said it was a knee, now they're saying it's a quad. He has some kind of a leg injury going on. The big question for me is, you know, like if Zamir White starts, is he a guy that you consider for your lineups this week against that very weak Chargers defense?
I mean, you kind of have to, in the sense, the thing is, it's the playoffs. So I don't know if you have to dig into sleepers at this point. You probably got your team pretty well handled, and I don't know you necessarily either, buys are out the window, everybody's in. So if you made the playoffs, I don't know that you necessarily need to. I think we're past the streaming options. There might be a couple out there. I don't know if you need to, but maybe from a DFS format could be a great spot to get super value on someone that might put some points on your board so that you can grab a top guy. So maybe from a DFS standpoint, I might look at that for sure. Oh yeah, let me write that down because it worked last week. I'm writing it down this week.
That Pittman stack last week, I used it too in a couple of my lineups.
Some it depends on what you plugged in there. It could have paid off and it couldn't, and it might not have. I had another one I did Fields. I did not pair him with DJ Moore. Classic mistake, like absolutely horrible, and I should have because I would have went a lot more.
I paired him with Komet instead.
Hey, there you go. Minnesota at Cincinnati. We got Saturday games this week. So that's kind of fun. With the lack of college football, NFL steps in, says we can make some money, we can diversify a little bit. Minnesota at Cincinnati, this actually could be a decent game. You got Dobbs versus Browning. I'm sure Dobbs is going to be back. I have no doubt about that. JJ's back. So you got Jefferson versus Chase, Dobbs versus Browning. You got Mixon versus nobody. He's kind of by himself. And the lack of defenses, this could also amount to some fantasy points for you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, I'd be a little bit concerned about Mixon this week. You know, like, if I have Mixon in my lineups, like, I'm obviously starting him. I'm not benching Mixon. But with how good Chase Brown looked last week, he looked very explosive. He has a lot of speed, and he looked really good on the touches that he got. That I'd be a little bit worried with Mixon for this playoff stretch that the rookie's going to start taking more and more touches away from him at this point after how good he looked and after the experiment kind of worked, in my opinion.
Yeah, he only had 3 touches. I don't know. Yeah, you're right. You're going to play Mixon either way, so it really doesn't matter. You're going to play Jamar Chase. You're going to play Jefferson, although it didn't pay off yet. Hopefully they get some practices in. Again, the backup quarterbacks, you get a new guy in. That's why we talk about for the Chargers, you know, maybe this is, you know, the rookie's chance to kind of step up finally with a new quarterback coming in, because I guarantee they got a lot of reps together for the Chargers game in Minnesota. You've seen that Jefferson, I don't know if you're going to get that output that you were expecting just yet. Plus, he's got the chest injury. He's questionable anyway. Pittsburgh and Indianapolis. I actually like the Indianapolis guys for points here. I know Trubisky made the top 10 this week. He could make the top 10 again, but it's just so much of a gamble. You could maybe throw in like a Warren or a Najee or something here. If you have to play Pickett, I got it. It's hard to not risk him, but you're definitely playing Pittman Jr. for sure, and probably some Taylor as well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I like the Colts guys in this matchup. The Steelers defense has not showed up this year. Now, like, for leagues that, you know, you have defenses in, you know, like, I know not all leagues play defenses anymore.
But DFS has it. So we can still talk defenses at DFS.
Yep.
So
DFS has it, as well as a lot of fantasy leagues, you still have team defenses. For me, I'm targeting Colts defense this week. That is a defense that I want for sure. They currently rank 7th in fantasy points per game. So they're already a top 10 defense in fantasy football, playing against the Steelers team with Trubisky, an offense that has struggled pretty much all year with their backup quarterback who likes to turn the ball over. Give me the Colts D all day.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic DFS run and a fantasy run right there. Because defenses, I think it doesn't matter what time of year, playoffs or otherwise, you're streaming defenses. At least if you're winning, you're streaming defenses. Denver at Detroit is your last one. This one is a lot more interesting than, I don't know, maybe the beginning year we thought this was interesting. As the year progressed, you wouldn't have thought this was going to be very interesting. Now that we're in this act 4 of the NFL season, this Denver-Detroit game, there's a lot riding on the line for it for both teams. You know, Detroit as far as being at the top, but Denver being on their streak and trying to make the playoffs. This could be a really fun game to watch.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Russell Wilson quietly ranks in the top 5 in touchdowns this year. Russell Wilson, the guy who was done last year. Remember that when there was no more Russell Wilson left in Russell Wilson? Well, he's been bouncing back. Now, from a fantasy perspective, you got to love both the Lions running backs, both of them, Gibbs and Monty. The Broncos have absolutely been terrible against fantasy football running backs all season long. So Monty and Gibbs can both definitely eat. Unfortunate for Amon-Ra St. Brown owners. He's going to get Surtain in this matchup, first round of the playoffs. I mean, there's no way you're ever benching Amon-Ra, but this is a week
he's still going to do well.
I mean, really you know, Surtain has done very good against elite wide receivers. Like, I'd be a little bummed out, you know, for my fantasy perspective with Amon-Ra. And because of that, this could be a Sam Laporta huge game for the Vikings. So I love the running backs, and I love Laporta for sure.
Absolutely. You can't talk about that enough, about what an asset that guy has been to the Detroit season. You know, you weren't really high on the Lions at the beginning of the season when we did our game-by-game analysis, but there's no way you could have factored in Laporta. And I think if you had been able to factor in Laporta, I think you might have been a little more happy with Detroit at the beginning of the year, because he is an absolute top 10, elite tight end, and there's not a lot of them. He's definitely one of those guys.
I mean, he's easily, like, next year during draft season, easily going to be one of the top 5 tight ends to get drafted. Might even be top 3.
Might be. And yes, to verify it's true, everybody. Adam speaks the truth. Russell Wilson is tied 4th in touchdowns. Unbelievable. You would not think that. You would not. Russell Wilson.
I know.
He is. There he is. Chicago at Cleveland. I don't really like this one so much. I like Fields for points. I always like Fields for fantasy points. Guy's kind of a fantasy points monster. I think DJ Moore might get you something. I don't think he's going to be the top guy, in fantasy this week. But I think you get points there. I don't like anything in Cleveland, but maybe I'm wrong there. You tell me, Adam.
No, like, I'm going to agree with you. I hate this matchup from a fantasy perspective. I see an ugly, low-scoring game. The Browns' defense struggled for a little bit. They had a good game last week in a really important win for their playoff looks, beating Jacksonville, and as you mentioned earlier, picking off Trevor Lawrence 3 times. So they might be back on track now. I hate this game from fantasy. Hate it.
Absolutely. Tampa Bay at Green Bay. This one could actually get you some fantasy points too. We saw Rachaad White up on the top 10 list yet again. He's done, he's not getting the streaks, because we talked about how nobody's really getting the streaks, but he's consistently up there. We talked about getting the 15 points to become relevant, fantasy relevant. He is definitely doing that. And we saw last night, what a running back can do to Green Bay's defense. Tampa Bay's defense can, typically do enough, but they got shellacked by Desmond Ridder and Drake London in week 14. So it kind of looks good for Love, and I don't know which Green Bay receiver, considering each one. This week it was Jaden Reed. Last week it was Watson. The week before that it was Dowd. So I don't know if they're going through rotation or what with receivers. Point being, there are fantasy points to be gained here.
Oh, yeah, like, I'm with you on what a lot of you said. It's not just that, last night seeing what can happen to Green Bay's rushing defense. It's been all season long. And by the way, all last year as well. Green Bay is awful in stopping the run. Love Rachaad White this week. This is like a great environment for fantasy, in my opinion. Because, the Packers are good against the pass, but Mike Evans is good against everybody. I'm not worried about Mike Evans. Chris Godwin has already been a fade. So, playing a good pass defense, Godwin can still be a fade, because for me, he's been a fade for weeks now. And then when you look at it the other way, kind of like you mentioned, Jordan Love. If I have Jordan Love, I'm starting him this week. Tampa Bay, they're the opposite of Green Bay, their defense. They're great against the run, awful against the pass. Green Bay's the opposite, right? So I think Jordan Love can go off in this game against Tampa Bay. And I'm right there with you with what you said about the receivers. I'm not super confident in any of them, because they all kind of keep rotating around. It's Jordan Love who I love in this game. And, kind of that fade type situation. A.J. Dillon's another guy. I'm fading him just about every week. I have no interest in A.J. Dillon. So the fact that he's playing a very good rushing defense, he would have been a fade for me anyway. So this is kind of like strength versus weakness and weakness versus strength. You know what I mean? Which is a great situation for your guys. I'm feeling really good about my fantasy players in this game.
Yeah, Green Bay 23rd against the run, 9th against the pass. So there you go. Rachaad White has been doing very well. And he's winning your pass catching backs. We talked about versatility, being good at doing the things you're not supposed to do. Rachaad White, that's where his success has come from. Every time he's been at the top, it is because of his receptions and running the ball in. So good situation there for Rachaad White. Matter of fact, I might actually white him down on my list. Houston at Tennessee. Tennessee stepped up against Miami last night. They got Houston, and it may be a Stroudless Houston. So that's going to hurt your wide receivers. If Stroud's back, I do like Nico Collins in this one. And Brown. If Stroud's not back, I don't know if I like anybody in this game, period. Maybe Henry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. And also, look, with Nico Collins, it's if Nico Collins plays too. He came away
Also-
with that last game with an injury as well, which if Nico's going to be out and Stroud's going to be in, Noah Brown is the guy that I
Yes.
think you have to watch. And he's a guy you can definitely plug into your lineups this week if Stroud is playing. I'm not so interested in Noah Brown if it's Davis Mills, but if Stroud's in and Nico's out, give me Noah Brown.
Yeah, I got no problem with that. I like Noah coming in too. I picked him up just for that, just for this little stretch here. The Rams at, I'm sorry, that was last week. The Rams at Baltimore. That was a great game. There was a lot of fantasy points there. This week, it's the Jets and Miami. This is going to be interesting. This is going to be a big one. This is going to have playoff implications 100%. The Jets defense versus Miami's offense, who did not look amazing last night. However, you've got Sauce versus Hill, and that opens up Waddle underneath, I think, and the run game underneath, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you have to like the Miami running backs in this one for sure. The Jets have not been nearly as good against the run as they are against the pass. I see a run-heavy type of scheme for Mike McDaniel and the Dolphins this week. I think you can start both running backs. Achane and Mostert are both good to go for fantasy this week. I agree with you on Waddle. I think Waddle can get – I see Waddle having a lot of targets and receptions, maybe not a ton of yards. Like, I think it's going to be a lot of those quick slants and across the middle and those, kind of shorter to intermediate routes for Waddle. But, hey, I mean, in PPR leagues, I'm definitely in on Waddle. For the Jets, I mean, it's really just Breece Hall for me. I mean, you're obviously putting Garrett Wilson in. He's going to get a lot of coverage from Howard and from Jalen Ramsey. So he's like a guy I'm not super excited about either. But as we just kind of saw,
I lost you, Adam. We'll get Adam back in just a second. But yeah, he brings up a great point in the fact that the Jets are actually 23rd against the run. If you believe that defense, as good as it's been, they're 23rd against the run. So susceptibility there, obviously that's been one of Miami's strong points this season. So yeah, Miami running backs, go ahead. I like it. And I think Garrett Wilson could do well. If we get Zach Wilson that we got from last week, I don't know. Jalen Ramsey has been playing well, but I think Garrett Wilson is him when he has someone that can throw him the ball. So I'm not mad.
Yeah, but I'm not counting on that same Zach Wilson to show up. You know what I mean?
That's what you, yes.
All of a sudden, after 32 starts, he has 32 starts. Like, he's not a new quarterback anymore. He started 32 games, and we think all of a sudden now he's figured it out after one really good game. And by the way, it wasn't even a really good game. It was a really good half. He didn't do anything in the first half of that game. He exploded in the second half.
He did.
And I'm not taking anything away from Zach. I said that was the best game of his career. But let's temper our expectations on Zach Wilson. I expect him to go back to the Zach Wilson he's proven to be over his other 31 games.
Who do you guys want to play this weekend in any game, any matchup, or the ones we're talking about? Stay along with us for the whole ride. Kansas City at New England. New England's defense been tough. Kansas City's defense had been tough, but they've been playing some tough teams. I don't know if New England is one of those tough teams. Zeke debuts at number 1. The debuts on the top 10 list, hits number 1 overall. I don't know. This one is so iffy for me that I don't want to play anybody. You're obviously playing your Kelsey, and you're never going to sit Mahomes, I guess. But I don't know. I think I'm staying away from this one.
I agree with you. Yeah, I mean, Kelsey and Mahomes are obvious. There's really no other Chief I'm super excited about. Rashee Rice is a very borderline play this week for me, with how good New England's defense can be. I know he's been good lately, but I'm not feeling great about having Rice in my lineups this week. He's also a tough guy to bench with kind of what he's done lately. And also I think this could be a factor as well. We have an angry, pissed off, annoyed, frustrated Patrick Mahomes coming into this game, which we don't really see ever, right?
You woke up the wrong gentleman.
Right, but what's that Mahomes going to look like? Is he going to be off and forcing it and going back to throwing interceptions because he's frustrated and pressing? Or is
in
he
New
going to
England.
absolutely explode this week for like 500 yards and 5 touchdowns because he's pissed off? So that's what I'm watching in this game.
I could see Mahomes go over 100 yards rushing in this one. Just
Oh,
frustration.
interesting.
Not really, but I could see Mahomes being a rushing machine, being the leading rusher at least this week, because I
Interesting.
think he's gonna want to just do it himself and just be pissed off. Him and Kelsey, I think are gonna go big this week, but I'm not touching them. I mean, those are the guys you have to play. So,
Well, yeah, you're playing them, but like those aren't like DFS targets. Like I'm not
right?
spending
Yeah, I'm not
up
spending the
on
money.
Mahomes and Kelsey this week. I'll pass on them and I'll spend my money elsewhere in more favorable types of matchups. But you could be right that they could go off in this one.
You could get an angry Mahomes. I like that. Giants at New Orleans. Olave, Barkley, Kamara, and that's about it. Although I do like the Giants to possibly get the win again in this one. They've got a resurgence. They're riding a streak right now.
It's possible, but playing in New Orleans is a whole different beast than playing at home on Monday Night Football. It's going to be loud. That's going to be a brand new experience for a guy like Tommy DeVito. So that's an interesting one to watch to see if DeVito's for real or not. If he can go into New Orleans and get a win, we can really start talking about Tommy DeVito. Like maybe they got something there.
Maybe. Atlanta, Carolina. Normally you're not going to chase it with Desmond Ridder and Drake London both finishing in the second position in the top 10 this week for their position. I know everybody talks about Carolina's pass defense, but it's really fallen off, especially with the coaching change and all that. Understandably so. I actually might like Ridder and Bijan this week. Definitely Drake London. I like this week. Anytime you're playing Carolina, that's a favorable matchup for me, even if it is Atlanta.
Gotta love Bijan this week. He's an obvious starter in season-long leagues. He's a guy I'd spend up on in DFS. He's a guy I'd look for. Carolina can't stop the run. They're awful against the run. And as the season gets later and as Carolina keeps losing games, you know as well as I do, like stopping the run defensively in the NFL, a lot of it is about effort. A lot of it's a mindset. Like this team is not going to run the ball on us, right? But like, where's the effort and motivation from a team that loses every week? And as it gets later and later, there's going to be guys on that field that don't really want to be out there anymore. That they're like, look, can we just get to the off season? Let's get this over with.
I don't want to get hurt for this. Like
exactly. So I could see Bijan, but then again, beware of Arthur Smith, because couldn't you see the storyline next week? All the Bijan owners in fantasy going back to F. Arthur Smith. He just lost me my fantasy playoff game because he gave Tyler Algier the ball 20 times this game. Why did he do that? Would that shock you?
Because we talked about using players, saving our players for when I need them. I don't know Atlanta needs Bijan to get past a one-win Carolina that's in shambles right now. So if I hear what you're saying. If I don't need him, might not necessarily use him. It could be a trap. Could be a trap, guys. Watch out. Washington at the Rams. Howell is back. I like him again for the top 10 after what I saw Lamar do. I like Howell in this one. I like my Rams players in this one. Kyron Williams for absolute sure. I think Puka does well. I think Cooper does well. Top 10 guys, I don't know. Kyron I like for the top 10 this next week as well. And Stafford, I think Stafford will do well again. So I like Howell. I like Stafford. I like Kyron. Who else do we like, Adam? Or not like?
I love this game for fantasy. Like, I think this could be a high-scoring fantasy matchup. I think this is a game that you can target for DFS as well. Get a couple guys in there. A guy I'm going to highlight this week is actually Curtis Samuel. He's been getting a lot more targets and a lot more involved in the Commanders' offense. And when you go look at the numbers for the Rams' defense, their cornerbacks are very good against outside wide receivers. Where they get beat most often is in the slot. Curtis Samuel basically plays exclusively in the slot. So very favorable matchup for Samuel and a guy who's already been seeing some increased volume lately. I love Samuel as a sneaky play this week.
Yeah, he's got 5 or more targets in the last 4 games. They just come off the bye week. When they played Dallas, so against the top tier defense. If they haven't really come up against top tier defenses until now, they're on a big stretch. They're going to play the Rams, who are considered a top tier pass defense, the Jets, who are considered a top tier. San Francisco is not considered, they're not in that red marker, but they're very good. And then Dallas again. Curtis Samuel got 12 targets against Dallas, the only other top tier defense. So look for Curtis Samuel over this stretch to kind of, do exactly what Adam's saying to get an uptick in targets and hopefully receptions and put some fantasy numbers up. San Francisco at Arizona. Love my San Francisco guys. I don't think I like anybody in Arizona. Argue with me, Adam?
No, I mean, it's obvious. You obviously play all your Niners, and I mean, who are you starting for the Cardinals?
Yeah. Dallas at Buffalo. I like play everybody in this one. Maybe not.
Oh, yeah.
Cook.
Play them all. Play them all in this one. Play them all.
It's going to be a good game, too. Baltimore at Jacksonville. I'm playing Lamar. Honestly, again, maybe the second time I've said this season, Zay Flowers, sure, I'll put him in. You could end up with Zay and OBJ on the top 10 list both again this week. I like it. Jacksonville, I expect better out of Jacksonville. We've seen Baltimore's defense can be beat. I don't know if Jacksonville will have enough to do it. This could be an interesting matchup. Hopefully we get a healthy Trevor Lawrence, a healthier Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that. Like, I'm probably fading the Baltimore Ravens running backs. I'm probably going to stay away from that situation for now. For me, the big question mark one is Zay Jones, right? Like, are you interested in starting Zay Jones this week? I'm probably not. But he's a tricky one.
He is a tricky one, and it's getting, they're running out of options. Ridley has proven himself not to be him like they thought. He's good. He draws coverage.
He's so streaky. He's so streaky.
Like, I mean, even barely streaky. The Monday night game, Philadelphia at Seattle. This was supposed to be a fantastic game. It may turn out to be good, but from what I've seen from both of these teams, it's kind of like who's going to struggle the least in this one, who's actually going to live up to their potential in this one. It is in Seattle, so I think that's bad for Philadelphia. But Seattle hasn't shown a lot against top tier teams, and I think Philly is still a top tier team, although maybe they're not as dominant as we thought they were in this part 4 of the season. And that's what we're talking about, the part 1, part 2, part 3 versus this crucial part 4. And in part 4, Philadelphia has not really shown up and been able to get it done. They've had a tough schedule, but there are games they have to win if they want to be considered a contender.
Look, in Seattle on Monday Night Football, I put the Eagles on upset alert that they might lose another game this week. Seattle at home, Monday Night Football. Obviously, the Seahawks have a better chance that Geno can play. We're not sure if Geno's going to be able to play or not, so that's definitely a big thing to keep an eye on there. But for fantasy, I like this game for fantasy.
I like Charbonnet.
That's
because of the quarterback
because the Eagles' run defense has been so good. I like my Seahawks wide receivers.
But if you've got your running backs that can catch, like Pollard caught seven himself this week. He did. I want to say Pollard got like 17. He doesn't make the top 10 list. You need 19 to make the top 10 list. But Pollard had a decent day, not necessarily as a runner, but more so as a pass catcher. We talk about these pass catching backs. Charbonnet can definitely catch a pass.
Yeah, I mean, he can definitely catch a pass. I don't know. I don't like the Seahawks running backs as much this week as maybe you do. So I think we differ on that one. And then Eagles, though I think that they can definitely lose this game with the way that they've played lately, fantasy-wise, you've got to love all your Eagles against the Seahawks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like AJ. I love Devonta. Devonta's really been getting the target rate up. You like to see him catch a couple more, but Devonta is definitely part of the game plan coming down the stretch. And as I talked about, kind of saving these guys, saving some of these plays, saving some of the stuff for these must-wins. This is a must-win. It's become a must-win for the Eagles.
And I'm going to say keep an eye on Dallas Goedert, too. This will be his second game back after an injury. It's also on a Monday, so he gets the extra day of rest. This could be his bounce-back game for sure.
Love Goddard in this one. That's a fantastic point. 100%. We got to talk the standings real quick. I know we're over time, but we got to talk about it real quick because the playoff implications are real. In the AFC, you've got 1-10 win team. Let's go to NFC first. NFC deserves the attention because they've got the first team in. San Francisco is in. You talk about which teams are actually hot. Philly's a 10-win team, but they're cold right now. It's San Francisco and Dallas are really the hot teams in the NFC, and then it's everybody else. Dallas, Philly, and San Francisco are all kind of fighting for that bye right now. San Francisco is in by virtue of the schedule, and then Detroit's trying to hang on. They've got 9 wins as well. You've got Minnesota at 7, but they have gotten really, kind of cold. They are definitely not assured one of those spots. And I think we said 6 teams sitting with 6 wins right now, and the Giants at 5. We talked about at the beginning of the show, this playoff race is wide open in the NFC. You've got your division winners, you've got Philly, and we're going to see who fills out those last couple spots.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of wide open in both conferences right now, right? And it's like, what's interesting for me, for the NFC is that all we talked about all year is how the NFC South is going to be a bad team that wins the NFC South, and then the rest of the division is going to have no shot. They have no shot at the wild card. Now they have a chance to get 3 teams in.
Absolutely.
Like the Bucks, the Falcons, the Saints might all make it at this point.
Mathematically, it is there. It is possible. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And you've got 3 teams. You got 3 teams from the West that have a shot.
Yeah, but as we know, the NFC, and we've said it all year, they're top heavy. For me, the Cowboys, Eagles, 49ers, if one of those 3 teams doesn't represent the conference in the Super Bowl, that is an absolute insanity to me, if you could get odds on that on the sports book, if you can get one of those 3 to make it against the field, you're probably getting 100 to 1.
Because nobody else has a defense. First of all, Detroit doesn't have a defense. Minnesota doesn't have a defense. Green Bay does not have a defense. Tampa Bay does not have a defense. Atlanta, New Orleans, the Rams, the Seahawks. Nobody has a defense to stop these offensive juggernauts of San Francisco. San Francisco is the most complete team in the NFL right now. Dallas Cowboys are right behind them, and I'll argue that with anybody. Philadelphia could, but they're just not living up to their potential. They're sliding back right now, but they'll be fine come playoff time. Playoff is a whole new season, but you're right. It's those 3 and everybody else. In the AFC, again, the AFC is even more up in the air. Literally every team in the AFC North is in the hunt. Every team in the AFC South is still mathematically in the hunt. Even Tennessee is still mathematically in it, but Jacksonville, Colts, and Texans are definitely in the hunt. The AFC West, mathematically they're all in it, but it's really Kansas City and Denver's to lose, as the Chargers can't seem to win a game to save their lives, and the Raiders seem to be doing a little too late. Too late. So the West is Kansas City and Denver that have a shot, but the South and the North and the AFC East, you've got Miami, Buffalo, and the Jets are not mathematically out of this either. I like the Jets' chances better than Tennessee for the 5-win teams. But what's really surprising, the North and the South, they've got 7 of the 8 teams that legit are in the hunt for this thing.
Yeah, I mean, the AFC, almost anything can happen at this point with the AFC, with how many teams are still alive, how many teams are in the race, and how bunched up all of them, and just within that small number. The way it looks right now, I think it's gonna shuffle around each week, as this season finishes out. Yes. Check back in 2 weeks, and nothing still might be decided in 2 weeks. You think 2 more games, maybe 1 or 2 of those teams will kind of separate themselves from the pack. I think this is going to be a dead tight race all the way to the finish in the AFC.
Well, and you also have to consider that everybody really has 2 divisional games at this point for the most part. The NFC West is the Rams only have 1 divisional game. Seattle's only got 1 divisional game left. But San Francisco, counting last week, they played 3 of their last 5 against division opponents. Arizona's not really in it, so I'm not going to spend too much time with them. Washington's got 2 divisional opponents. Philly has 2 divisional opponents left. New England does. Everybody in the AFC East, with everybody being in it right now, makes it very interesting because all 4 of those teams, they all play each other. They all have 2 divisional games. So they're going to play 2 of the other 3 as we finish out the season. Las Vegas has to play 3 divisional opponents, and that means the Chargers do as well. Denver has 2 divisional opponents. Kansas City has 2 divisional opponents. And it just keeps going. Minnesota has 3. Green Bay has 2. Detroit has 2 divisional opponents. So you're going to see this even out, like you said, over the next couple of weeks. You're really going to see this start to separate as these division games happen. But it's amazing. As it's supposed to be the end of the season, almost everybody plays a division opponent. And so that week 18 game where you normally get a lot of people sitting, and it really doesn't matter. You're not going to have a lot going on in fantasy that week. But from a fan's perspective, now that the fantasy season is over and you can kind of kick your feet up and actually enjoy the games, you're going to have a lot of games to enjoy because there's going to be a lot of playoff implications there. Adam, anything as we sign out today?
I mean, it's something that I referenced before, and it's that, these playoff races, it's like, it just speaks to the level of competition in the NFL right now. And this is what the NFL's wanted, right? More teams to be alive as long as possible, because then more games are important, more games are interesting. It increases the viewership. It makes fantasy better. It makes watching the product better. Like, I love it, with how many teams are in the mix this year and how many teams have not separated themselves from the pack. And it's also great to see that both conferences are different as well. Like the AFC is like this real level playing field of so many like pretty good, not elite teams, while the NFC is like, your big 3 elites, top heavy, and then rest of the pack. So it's 2 completely different landscapes in 2 different conferences as well. This has been an awesome, unpredictable season for sure.
Now that we are solid into Act 4 of the NFL season, fantasy implications all over the place. Playoffs are in full swing. I hope you made it. I hope you come out on top. Go back, check out towards the beginning of the show. Check out all those stats. Keep following us at that EFIN show. Follow Adam at Adam Hulse Sports to get all the stats, all the information that's really going to be relevant that you're going to need to follow to get these playoff wins. It's all not as clear as it seems with the performers going up and down. It's a big roller coaster, but we'll help y'all figure it out right here on that EFIN Morning After Show and all across the Fantasy Sports Corporation. For Adam Hulse, I am Chris Fox. We'll see you guys next week and all through the week. Best of luck. Everybody take care. We'll see you next time.